Welcome, and thank you for checking in at the Inner Game of Change podcast, where I focus on exploring the multi-layers of managing organizational change. My name is Ali Juma, and you're listening to the Inner Game of Change podcast. My guests today are Peter Phan and Gilbert Kruidenier, authors and passionate change professionals. Two great minds who work together to publish a book that is fun, easy to read, and full of practical pieces of advice and effective tips to avoid bad change. In this episode, as well as chatting about their drive to write bad change, Peter and Gilbert share their thoughts on better ways to create good change in the workplace. I am grateful to have Peter and Gilbert chatting with me today. So Peter and Gilbert, thank you so much for joining me in the Inner Game of Change podcast. I'm grateful to have you here talking about your book.
Yeah, thank you. Here. Very happy to be here.
Thank you very much. So we're going to talk about your wonderful book, which is about bad change.
Yes.
But before we start with that and dive deeper into it, Peter and Gilbert, it will be great for the listeners to know about you. So we'll start with you, Peter.
Sure. So I'm Peter Phan. By day, I'm an engineer working on energy efficiency and renewable energy projects. By night, I'm a house boyfriend to my partner, who I've been with for 9 years. We live in Melbourne with Tiny, our Pomeranian Chihuahua. And in between all of this, I'm also running my business, Blimp Studios, which helps clients to visualize their projects and create change that you can see.
Excellent. An engineer. Gilbert.
Yeah, so Gilbert Kruidenier, longtime friend of Peter. I'm also the father of Dash, the Greyhound, our foster dog that we adopted eventually. I am married to Yumi. We just celebrated this weekend our 25th year together.
Congratulations, well done.
So yeah, we're making good progress there. I recently moved to Brisbane, Queensland, after living in Melbourne for a very long time. And I work at the University of Queensland as a change and communications person. I've been working in all different kinds of change for the past 15 to 20 years and even teach change tools at Deakin University. It's sort of a hobby that got a bit out of hand, but I really enjoy it. Fantastic.
Thank you so much, both of you. I do not have a dog, so it's
never too late.
And let's get into your book. So Bad Change, the book. What inspired you to write it? We'll start with you, Peter.
So for me, I'm not sure that there was an inspiration for the book.
Yeah.
Most of our ideas, particularly between Gilbert and I, it's usually comes from a silly comments, and it's silly comments building on top of silly comments and ideas. And over time, we get overly excited, and then it'll get to a point where we go, yeah, let's do it. And so, Bad Change is one of those that we sort of discussed about over lunch. And with most projects, when you work with Gilbert, we'll sort of agree on it, and then I'll walk away, and before you know it, Gilbert's got a plan, already drafted. He's written all the tips and everything, and he's like, "Yep, here's what I've done. Now it's your turn." And so, I add my twist to it. We created 16 characters in the book that we both fell in love with, and after a million WhatsApp messages, we finished and launched Bad Change.
Was that born out of frustration for you, Gilbert?
No, not at all. I didn't really necessarily want to write a book because I always feel like most of the books about change have been written. But when Peter pitched his idea, it was a very not very serious pitch. We were just like, oh, it would be fun if we could do this. So we weren't very methodical about it or strategic. We just wanted to do something that would make people laugh a little bit, but also not take themselves too serious, because there's enough seriousness in the world. So there was no real frustration, although when we started working on the book, we did take care to not become cynical or maybe even a bit sarcastic in some of the jokes, because when you make jokes and when your sense of humor gravitates that way, sometimes when you see it written down on a page, it looks really unpleasant. You go like, oh no, this doesn't work at all. So we were very aware of it, but we had the examples for so many different things that go wrong in change, and we tested them on a couple of people, and they were all very much affirmative, and they said, yeah, this is exactly what it's like. And it's good on you for putting that into a book. And that was only when we had the draft. So we we just wanted to provide, I guess, a bit of a counter sound or something else that it's not so much a manual on how to do it right. It's more a manual on how not to do it wrong.
So how did you land on the title? Was the title supposed to say, was the title supposed, yeah, well, I thought I was going to ask about that because sometimes there were books that I've read which says literally, actually there's a book that says what linguistics is not.
Yeah.
So the moment I saw your book, obviously you don't mean you're promoting bad change.
No.
But you wanna portray and use a comic way and a visual way to articulate a message. Peter, what would be that message?
What would be that message? I think the message behind bad change is bad change happens all the time. Heaps of people have encountered it. And when you do encounter it, chances are you're not the only person who's encountered it. There's, probably 100 other people who've encountered the same situation. So you're not alone. And all you really need is a bit of guidance and someone to sort of prod you to remind you of things that you probably already know. That's probably not in front of your mind at the time. And that's really what bad change is all about.
And the original title, if I remember it completely correctly, because I still have a Google Drive folder with that name, which is incredibly unhelpful, but I don't want to change it out of fear that I lose the links, is change that doesn't work. And that's where we started, because we were having a conversation, I think, about all the different practices that we know don't work, but people keep doing them out of lack of other options. So we started with change that doesn't work, but that obviously, unfortunately, that's where Peter always brings his skills to the table. And like, yeah, that doesn't really ring well, and we can't really put that on anything. So we kept freestyling on it until we landed on bad change, and it draws attention. That's definitely what it does. People, when they're like, okay, a book about bad change, what am I in for here? Instead of exactly what you just said, like all these titles that instruct people on how to do things differently. We didn't want to make that book. We just wanted to have a little bit of fun with the things that we all experience that can be quite frustrating. Sometimes you're like, for example, the example that I always take is the sponsor who's just absent, but it's very relatable for people. So when you call that bad change, it makes a statement at the same time. And then obviously we provide the tips where they can choose to do things better, or they can just keep doing what they do. It's either or for us.
And I like what you guys have done. There was one key message that I read again and again, even if you haven't really spelled that one out clearly, which is, although we're talking about bad change, both of you promoted do good change.
Yes. Yeah, because there is enough bad stuff in the world already. And I feel very strongly, Peter a little bit less, because he keeps telling himself that he is not actually a change manager, but he's been exposed to so many of them that he's basically one of us now, even if he doesn't want to.
Yes.
But there are a lot of practitioners still out there. And fortunately, it's a diminishing cohort who just do what was always done and get what was always gotten. But the contract is good, so they just keep pursuing it. But it doesn't help anyone, including themselves, and not in the least the community. And I'm very big on community and raising the profession because, well, it's our brand of quality. Like the lowest common denominator is what people will consider to be good change. So if we set that up for, let's say, a higher quality standard, then people can see that and go like, oh, well, this is what I should be asking for. These are the people I should be hiring. And then eventually the world will be a better place. I mean, that's a bit of a logic leap, but that's how it came together in my head.
Completely agree. Where does bad change happen, or why does it happen? Is that because, actually, let's just not say about bad change, let's just talk about bad change practice. Where does it come from? Is that a lack of capability? Is that a laziness? Is that a sloppiness? Is that we don't have a lot of time? Is that a confluence of a lot of other things? Peter, as an engineer.
So from my perspective, speaking on Gilbert's point as well, about myself not calling a change manager, I've always thought of myself as a change manager's best friend. So I'll sort of go in and help them. And I've been in the change field for a while now, so I feel like I do know a fair bit about it. But through all the projects that I've worked on, I found that the difference between an organization that sort of is able to handle change really well as opposed to one that's not very good at it is their ability to move in a direction that an unknown direction, I guess. So they know where they're heading. They don't know how they're going to get there, but they're just going to move anyway. And they're willing to sort of make adjustments and implement the change regardless. Mm-hmm. Whereas the ones that are a bit, I guess, bad at delivering change is that they're a bit more risk averse. And for them, it feels like it's all in or nothing. So they're willing to, the sponsors are a little bit more risk averse. They don't want to sign things off because they're scared that if they commit to it, then it's going to be, something that's committed forever, as opposed to something you can change in the future.
Yes. Gilbert?
I would add to that the issue that I often see is when people have, or organizations, I should say, have a limited capacity for self-reflection, so they don't recognize their own limitations. They feel like they can do everything. And the smarter the people in the organization get, the more I see that, because they feel like their capacity is elastic and they can just always absorb more. And those are the changes that I often see take a turn for the worst, because there's only so much change you can pump through an organization at any time, and also only that much change that you can actually coordinate. And a lot of organizations are struggling with it at the moment. It's like, oh, there's so much change going on. And that's a conversation that I have many times during a month. But the reality is that there's always a lot of change going on, and it's been going on since the 1980s. But we just become more aware of it. But we haven't really made that jump to the self-reflection of, can we actually do this? Is this a good idea to do this now? Because, of course, there's always critical and strategic change that needs to happen. But there's also a lot of projects where you go like, wouldn't have killed anyone if you just postponed it for 6 months.
You're right.
And then give yourself some space.
Yes. So actually, you just mentioned really an important piece of, I always encourage people to actually understand the history of change management and where it came from. So it started with the business improvements and, all the campaigning around it and how it evolved since the early 2000s. And if you understand the context and history, that will always link you back to the purpose of why the discipline exists in the first place. Yes. And maybe that can be a wake-up call for some of us. I want to come to the characters, guys. You've put a lot of characters in there, and I like Rob. And I like Chloe. Actually, I like Chloe. It was the idea that we create those personas or characters in the book so that maybe deep inside when we read your book, maybe we can be honest with ourselves and can associate with one of the characters.
Yeah, pretty much. I think the characters speak to parts of all of us. Some people identify with a lot of different characters. We just started at some point and then tried to figure out like, okay, who are the people in this organization, this bad change company? Well, what do we need? So we started with a very simple org tree of, okay, we need a finance person and we need that person and that person. And then we needed a couple of more people and we needed a couple of random staff members. Another thing that Peter and I have always tried to integrate into our work from very early stage when we started working together is to have that diversity of audience.
Sure.
Because we didn't just want to have one white male and one white female. We wanted to be a little bit more inclusive. And that allows for lots of use of color and lots of use of different funny things that we can just insert there. So hopefully it connects with people. And we think it did, because I think we've now about sold 500 of those books. So a lot of people like it. And a lot of people can identify with it.
Which is a reflection of the workplace now, right? Yeah. Yes, Peter?
Yeah, so adding on to that, one of the great comments we received was, a lady reached out to me and said, she really liked the book because she saw Andy had a hearing aid and her son has an hearing aid. So she felt that, she could immediately connect with that. And, that was something that we put in place, but it wasn't the type of feedback that we were expecting to receive. So it's great to hear that, people are connecting with that.
Yes. Your book is actually divided into a few sections. And so you covered the leadership, you covered the readiness, you covered the communication, the delivery. I haven't seen a lot about the project management role.
That's because project managers are evil. No, I'm joking. Project managers are lovely.
Yes, yeah. Was that intentional that we left them out, or was really the focus is pretty much on the change management discipline?
We definitely touched on project management in a few sections, or a few tips.
Yeah.
It wasn't its own section, but Pedro, the project manager, is probably the person that represents bad project management.
The worst of project management. Yes.
So if you were to follow his comics, then I'd say that we did address project management here and there, but we definitely didn't create a whole section on it. Project management it goes side by side with change management. That's what Gil and I both agree.
We actually tried to come up with a follow-up on that change. And when we started to look at the process behind project management, a lot of the jokes were the same as for change management because a lot of the work is so interconnected. And we'd rather extend the hand of friendship towards the change or to the communications people and to the project managers people, because we feel that the best change happens when they work together. But of course, we can still poke a little bit of fun at them because, well, you should poke fun at everything.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, and these poking the fun is an interesting piece because sometimes it can bring the seriousness a little bit down, and when you bring it a little bit down, then you'll probably be far more open to learning. I want to ask you a question which has been in my head for a while now, and I am one of those people that promote the change management discipline through my podcast and also through my professional network. Are we exaggerating the importance of change management as a discipline? Are we pumping our own tires, put it that way?
Peter?
I don't think so. So I think that change management is definitely important.
Sure.
I wouldn't say that it's hard work, but you need to work really hard, right? So there's a lot of things that you need to think about and take into consideration when you're delivering change. And it can be a little bit overwhelming if you don't have all the parts in places.
Yes.
And the parts that you need is not just things that you can do by yourself, it's sort of the organization as a whole. And so if the whole organization recognizes the importance of managing change really well, then the project will likely proceed positively. But if not, then I think it can be a bit tricky trying to get support from people.
Yes, Gilbert?
I think, I first of all, I agree with Peter. We don't exaggerate the importance, but I think we do exaggerate the complexity because there's a lot of money to be made if you scare people.
Yes.
And then tell them that it's really, really hard and they can only solve that impossible solution or impossible problem with your solution. And I feel that that's a bit unfair because most change is also not complex. It's complicated. So complicated, you know the solution. Complexity, you don't know the solution. And that's hardly ever true, especially when it comes to change, because most of the change that we do, especially because most of us are average practitioners. I don't consider myself to be at the top of the game. I don't consider myself to be world changing. The change that I do, most people could do. It's not everybody's appetite to do it, but you can probably do it. So there's no real complexity there. Nobody, and most of our clients as well, are asking for impossible solutions to incredibly difficult problems. It's just run-of-the-mill change for most of it. So we're not exaggerating the importance, I think, but what we're trying to convey is that we can reach perfection. And I think that's ridiculous and also very unhelpful because it sets us up. And I had that conversation just this morning with a person who was about to go into their team meetings. And like, I want to talk to people about their superpowers. And I inwardly groaned. I didn't groan in his face because that would be very impolite.
Yes.
But I said, if I can give you one recommendation, I would not talk about superpowers. Just talk about the powers, the strengths that they have, because they don't have to be super. They can just be themselves and average, because if you put the super in front, it makes it look like some gargantuan effort that will be so hard for them. And is it really? Because it's probably not. And he sort of looked at me and blinked and like, that's actually a really good point. I wanted to like pump them up a little and make them aware that I respect their capabilities. Like, well, maybe you can just acknowledge that they are good human beings already and don't need to be super at anything. Just try to do your average best. And that's more than enough for most people. So yeah, I think we can stop promoting ourselves perhaps then as the superheroes who come in, because there's all sorts of stress related with that as well, and anxieties. And a lot of people on LinkedIn, much smarter than myself, have written about that as well, that the change manager is the superhero. I think we don't need that anymore. We can have a seat at the table because we have useful things to say and the profession has been around for a long time. But if we come from a position of inferiority where we feel like we need to shout louder just in order to be heard all the way into the boardroom, yeah, I think we're just approaching it in the wrong way.
And I've been promoting a lot in my podcast and also in my conversations. I actually coach few change managers through LinkedIn. I coach them with the little knowledge that I have. I don't claim that I know it all. But I know the discipline is an evolving discipline. We deal a lot with human beings. I completely agree with you, Peter, that is not for everyone. You would need to have you need to be a patient operator, but you need to be equipped with a lot of knowledge as well, and maybe strategies. The whole idea is, I always describe ourselves, if I can be an influencer and a relationship builder, this can help a lot in helping the business manage change. And not only just in the workplace, it's even outside the workplace. So I'm with you. I don't think I am exaggerating that we are the superheroes, but I would like to also amplify that it's definitely a change without a change manager to support it and help it is certainly not a rich experience, in my opinion.
I fully agree with that. I often say that to people when they ask me, so like, what do you bring to the table? Like, well, I will give you a good experience while also making everyone else look good, because we provide no surprises. We do not lie. We do no harm. As long as we follow those 3 rules, everybody's got to be okay with this change. Yes. And it turns out to be true most of the time.
Yes, absolutely. Talking about the change experience, that's actually one of the most important things that we can influence, which is, what's the feeling, what's the change experience that people have actually experienced after they go live, whatever you want to call it. And that's a measure that I try always to harness and capture after, when I work on projects myself. How long did the book take you to write?
How long did it take?
Did you guys did you have a disagreement?
No. Peter and I don't have disagreements. It just doesn't happen.
It's very, very rare that we have a disagreement.
Yeah.
Cool. It's mostly, we're working at our own different speed and rates and times of the day. We'll often, so I'm a bit of an owl and Gilbert's an early bird. So sometimes, when I'm heading to bed at around 3, 4 a.m., Gilbert's wakes up at 3, 4 a.m. and I'll give him a bit of an update and we have this, quick 15-minute conversation before I go to bed and he starts his day. But in terms of the book, I think it took about 300 hours in total, something like that.
Yeah, and the thing that you need to keep in mind is that writing the book, writing the content was not that much work. It was a couple of days if you count the hours together, so maybe like 30, 40 hours. But then you have to re-edit it and start to think like, oh, this is not going to work, take that out. And that's what works so well between Peter and myself, because we have no filter. We don't need a filter. We know we're both there for the same thing. There's no ego. We're both trying to make the same thing work. And the great thing is that Peter understands what I mean by something, and then he can visualize it. And when he can visualize it, I understand what he means. And then I describe the picture that I'm looking for. And that always seems to work really well. And because we're fairly different in our approaches, we always end up with what is a very good average that appeals to most people. So as long as you give space to each other and allow each other that creative freedom, because I can definitely not create images as Peter can, and he cannot string words together as I can, but we can both do a little bit of what the other can do. So we respect each other for our strengths.
And writing a book is a great activity, because writing has got a magic side effect, which is it forces you to articulate your thoughts.
Yes.
And put everything together in a comprehensible way.
Yeah, and that was the
everything
hardest
into
thing.
3 squares. That's the hardest part.
That is the hard part indeed. You've got the 3 squares and you have to be funny. And being funny on command is quite hard.
Yes.
But you're absolutely right. The reduction and then sometimes the further reduction. So I was really trying to crunch the words and putting it into a frame, and then people would tell me, doesn't fit, you'll have to cut it back further. And it always worked. It always works because there's then that pressure. If you want it to look good, you want to fit it into the frame, you just have to make it work. And there's always different words that you can use. So maybe it took 50 hours to write the content, but then it took another 50 hours to get it right. Yes. And then it took another 100 hours to get those annoying spelling mistakes out there. And then it's a work of passion and something that I love doing, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend it to everyone. You have to be a certain person for it. And I wouldn't do it by myself. I did it because I was working with Peter. And if he wouldn't be interested in it, that book would not get written.
Yes. And that really helps, this level of collaboration, the fun, the different ways of thinking, they all help. And it sounds like both of you have got a reference group as well to help you with proofreading and all of that.
Yeah, would you like to comment?
Yeah, I think it's a lot easier when you have a partner because you can bounce ideas.
Yes.
I find that a lot of people tend to write the book by themselves and then they have, a review team or something. But having someone directly involved in the book, I think was, a lot. It was a game changer, essentially.
Yes. Yeah, I do feel that. Sorry, go.
I was going to say, and I think you also need a strong reason for it. It can't be money and fame. Gilbert and I, we've sold over 500 copies and I don't see Gilbert and I become millionaires anytime soon. But what we do see is that the community is enjoying the book. We've received a lot of amazing comments and feedback. And, the money we raised for the National Homeless Collective, which is around $9,000, that's what we see. And so, if you're thinking of, writing a book so that you can, become a bit more famous, I'd say that you may or may not achieve that. And it might be a bit more stressful if that's what you're trying to achieve. But if you don't care about it as much and you're just doing it because you enjoy it and it's fun, then it becomes a much more happier process.
Yes, and I completely agree. The purpose that drives your way of thinking and why you do things is far more valuable than. Don't get me wrong. If people are driven by money, that's fine too. That's fine. That's completely fine. But I think you mentioned Peter, the inner satisfaction does not really come unless you feel. I say knowledge is useless unless you share it.
Yes, I always say when people say, "Well, knowledge is power," like applied knowledge is power. Otherwise, it's just sitting in your head. Yeah. And further to Peter's point about the book, doing the promotion is not something that we greatly enjoy, but it's something that you need to do. But the coolest part is when you see that your book gets shipped off to some faraway corner of the world and a person in Canada has it and they're posting a picture of it because they're so keen to get it. Or even better, if it gets a little bit more quiet around the book because we haven't been doing any promotion, then all of a sudden it picks up and a couple of people are buying it or someone has promoted it during their book. So it's that gift that keeps on giving, so to speak. Yes. And it's just amazing where it has brought us because it has connected us to wonderful people, given us opportunities to speak, like join a podcast like yours. And that's just really so valuable. And not to discount the fact that when you say that you've actually written a book, people look at you differently. They go like, you've clearly put a lot of time and thought and effort into this. And that's definitely true. And then when they read it, they go like, oh, it's actually also funny. And that's sort of the best point of it for as far as I'm concerned.
And as part of the challenge community, I really appreciate, the knowledge that both of you put in the book. My background is in literature and academics and all of that. So I understand the sweat equity and the effort and time. But I also know what you feel when you've got your book shipped to a far, far away place that you would never have thought. Yes. I can tell you I've got 100 podcasts downloaded in Ukraine.
That's amazing.
And in Dubai. I was like, okay, yeah. And Finland, how the hell did I get in there? And but that's the beauty of the work nowadays. You spent, both of you, hours putting this together. Yeah. I want to start with you, Peter. What have you learned about maybe your knowledge and about, yourself?
About myself and the book, I need to think about that one. I think the biggest lesson is that there's no limit on what you can do. So I never thought of writing a book. Like that was not on my list at all. Right. So if Gilbert didn't bring that up over, lunch, I wouldn't have thought about that. So, I suggested, to create a comic book as a joke almost. And he's like, yeah, let's do it. And we did it. And so I think there's no limitation on what you can or cannot do. As long as you have an intention and a purpose for it and, someone to support you, I think you can achieve what you want to do. I know that sounds a bit cliche, but, writing this book and creating this book is something that I didn't think about. And the fact that we've sold over 500 copies is just really, really satisfying to see. Yeah, not sure if that's a great answer, but
no, not at all. That's your answer. And you probably will learn more about it maybe down the track when more people will buy it and give you feedback and say, I've never thought about that. How about you, Gilbert?
I would say that having the idea of writing a book is a lot easier than the practice of actually writing the book. But I felt that once you commit to the idea, it becomes a live thing. And you, like what Peter said, there are no real limitations. And I needed to keep reminding myself, like 50 comics, that's what we're doing. So we made a detailed plan and we worked to the plan. And I got a little bit too obsessed with, we have to deliver to schedule because we're making promises and we have to do that. And then Peter was a bit relaxed about it. He wasn't relaxed about it, but he was a bit more easygoing about it, as he generally is. And I got the cue at some point. It's like, I need to calm down a little bit. I need to enjoy this a lot more because it's really not necessary. We're not creating world peace here in this book. We're just having a good time. So we should definitely do that. That was one of the really big learnings. And the other one was that I had overestimated the value of having a large reference group of people to work through because there were a couple of really good ones in there, but it required a lot of management. We had to keep following up because people say yes to the concept and they love the idea of being involved. But next time I would probably go with 3 really good ones or 3 really different ones instead of a larger group of people. Although we really do respect their time and effort that they put in because it's freely given and we really appreciated it. But you learn from the process. And I'm not saying that we'll never do it again because Peter and I always have a couple of ideas about what else could we do.
Yes.
But next time we'll schedule it a bit more carefully, I think, and give ourselves some more time.
Excellent. And what's your advice to the change management community, Peter? We're coming to the end of the podcast and I really want to hear your thoughts.
I think the biggest advice is really be social and mingle with everyone. There's so much knowledge to be shared, and the more you mingle, the more you'll learn. And when I say learn, it doesn't just have to be in the change industry. You can sort of learn from different industries as well, and that's something that I really, really like doing. So, for an example, when we went through COVID and people started facilitating online, presenting behind a webcam, who are the type of people who were used to presenting on webcams? And if you think about it, they're YouTubers and video gamers, right? They've been doing this for years and years and years. And so I literally went onto, their channels and went to tutorials and learned, how did they appear in front of the webcam? What are the different tools that they use?
Yes.
And so I implemented that as part of my cartoon of a change. And, there's all these musics and animations and fancy stuff happening, and people really enjoyed it because it was engaging. And so it was really learning from those experts. And then after that, it's just a matter of getting that information and paying it forward. So, if someone else wanted to ask me about it, then, I'd be telling them all about, webcams and lightings and all the different tools.
Fantastic. And how about you, Gilbert?
I would say contribute to your profession and don't tell yourself you have nothing to add. The amount of time that I hear that from people, that just always makes me a little bit sad because everyone has something to add. And a community only works if you put in just a bit more than you take out. So go to those events, support a change friend, give your time, say yes to doing a talk. Attend those drinks, be a mentor, write about your experience, or do a podcast, a series of illustrations, or anything else that add more perspective to how change can be done. Because what we also learned from the book is that there's always room for one more opinion, and people will connect to it or not. But there's always a group of people out there who are looking for that other voice. So please just don't sit there quietly thinking you have nothing to add. Join the community, be part of it.
And completely agree. You will do yourself disservice if you don't share the knowledge. Peter and Gilbert, I'm thoroughly enjoying this conversation. I certainly have learned a lot from your book, especially from Rob the Resistor. I encourage all my listeners to get a copy of the book. We're going to put all the information in my podcast. How would employers and listeners reach you, Gilbert and Peter?
If you want to reach me, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm a very friendly person. I'll accept most connection invites unless you start with a sales straight away. Otherwise, you can also visit my website, www.flimpstudios.com, and you'll be able to find me there as well.
Thank you. And Gilbert?
And for me, just find me on LinkedIn because my name is very hard to spell. And if you find me on LinkedIn, you will find everything that you want to know about me. And because of my surname, which you will probably find in the show notes, you can just look me up on Google and you'll find everything you need to know about me on there.
Thank you very much. Peter and Gilbert, you've done fantastic. Just remember, there are millions of people that have started the idea of book, but they've never finished. Both of you have finished it. And although your book is called Bad Change, but both of you have done really well to the community. So I really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you
very much. Hi everyone, I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode. To know more about my guests and this podcast, check the innergameofchange.com.au website and remember to subscribe. I can't wait to share with you my next episode. Until then, stay well and stay safe.